see what we're up against. All right, guys, welcome back. The sun is just breaking through. It has been raining all day here, and we don't need any more rain around here, but that's a side story. What I'm doing today is I'm out here at version 1.0 of the Hillbilly Hideout. And if you haven't seen videos with this in it before, well, come on back to my playlist, Sawmill Setup. You're going to see a whole bunch of videos dealing with, well, making lumber and my Woodland Mills HM130, which is hiding back in there. And you'll also see some information on when I initially put up this sawmill shack. All right, so why am I here? I want to tell you guys exactly about why I'm building a new sawmill setup, why I'm building a new sawmill shack, version 2.0, if you will. Last video, if you guys saw that, you noticed that I gave you some rough dimensions of my new setup. My new setup, which is being built directly behind this setup, is going to be 20 feet long and 10 feet wide, so it's going to be a little bit smaller, but it is going to be a lot more accessible. What I'm going to do today, aside from just giving you a basic overview of what I'm building, sort of a recap from last day, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons and the reasons why this particular setup, this log structure, version 1, as you can think. So what I'm going to show you guys today is the reasons why I'm building version 2.0 of the Hillbilly Hideout and why version 1 didn't quite live up to my expectations. Now, don't get me wrong here. This thing has been standing through central Ontario winters up here in Canada for a number of years. In fact, I think I put it up the day after I got the sawmill in order to keep rain, sleet, and everything else from falling on my mill. This thing is not a piece of junk necessarily. It is just not as practical as I want it to be. As they say, you don't tend to buy the first version, you buy the second version, because the second version's got everything ironed out. My second version hopefully will iron out those things that I've been dreaming about to make my life easier out here at the sawmill. Let's face it, I'm not getting any younger, and I don't want to work twice as hard as I have to. In terms of what you see before you with version 1.0, let's just cover what that's basically all about before I talk about version 2.0. Version 1.0, you guys are standing under it here, and more or less it's made out of red pine logs. And the reason it's made out of red pine logs is because I'm in a red pine forest. The whole goal with building this thing was to get it up easily, and I also didn't want to put any concrete footings in. So how's this standing, you might ask? Well, you'll notice that every single post, like this one, is adjacent to a live tree. There's the live tree providing the vertical support, right? I guess, what's that, horizontal support. This is holding up the beam, which is ultimately holding up the rafters. This is holding all the weight. This is doing all the support. How are you going to keep this tree and this particular post close to each other? Well, with nothing more than a simple ratchet strap. Does this structure move in the wind? Absolutely. But let's face it, a tree isn't going to move that much, right? This is the live tree. It's not going to sway that much when it's only about 8 feet off the ground. So the roof is probably only swinging, you know, an inch or two. And for those of you who get worried about that, well, this has been up in the middle of winter here in Canada for, I think it's gone through 3 winters without any issue. So just if that provides any help to you, there it is. So if we have a look down here, you'll notice that one post is back here. I have another post here, a post here, and at the end another post. What I do in the winter time is I actually put up another post, which you see lying on the ground there. I actually put up another post right about here. And the reason I do that is that reduces the distance this support beam has to span, because once you get a snow load up there, the weight that this beam is holding drastically increases. So I put another post here, and if you guys stand back here, what we end up getting from that post to the extra post I put in is approximately 12 feet, and that corresponds to the width of logs I tend to cut. So the logs I can load on the bunk and still roll in without problems. If we look at what I have for a support beam up there, it is a touch undersized, okay? Hence one of the reasons why I want to build a version 2.0 a little bit better. So although I say it's a little bit undersized, we're not exactly talking about building code here, but that particular beam is the entire length of the sawmill shack here, and it is being supported by all the posts, and that beam is supporting all the individual rafters. If we have a look up there, those rafters, they vary in dimensions, although within reason you're getting from about 5 to 7 inches in overall diameter. You guys see that there? In terms of spacing here, we're looking at 2-foot spacing, one rafter to the next. We're at approximately 2 feet. Based on my understanding of framing, that should be well within parameters, well within what it should to hold the weight. At the back here, same idea. You guys can see that big long beam here. See it there? Essentially, it's just one long tree. This has posts every so often, and in fact, I actually put another post right here. I just have it out for right now, but I put another post right there for the winter. These posts, this one and this one, used to, up until the other day, have a tree right behind it. Why is there no tree there anymore? Well, it's because they're on the ground here. This is the area where version 2.0 of the Hillbilly Hideout's going. Don't worry about this thing tipping over. There's still a live tree there for support. There's still a live tree down there for support. Plus there's 3 trees at the front. If this thing was going to tip over because of the winds, and it is a touch windy up there today, but if it was going to tip over, it would have to essentially break all the ratchet straps and or have these other trees snap. So I'm going to take the risk on that one. Now it is a little windy up there today, and if you guys have a look up at the canopy, you guys see the trees moving around a little bit. I wouldn't call it a gale force wind, but it is moving. If you look at the tops of the trees, which are right behind the posts, that'll give you a good idea what's happening up there. And then if we bring ourselves back down and actually have a look at what's happening here for motion, like there's next to nothing happening, right? So I've been out here and you can see the roof shifting, but to be honest with you, it's very, very minimal at that. Now let's talk about the dimensions of this thing to start with. So first and foremost, this is my Woodland Mills HM130. This has 1 extension added. So I think that brings us to just under 17 feet, right around that, in terms of overall length. In terms of overall width, you're very, very close, I think, to 6 feet. And so I wanted a little bit of space on this side. Obviously a little runway here so I can walk up and down. Talking about the structure underneath me, over top of me rather, this structure in total length is about 35 feet. Total width, you're at about 11 feet. 11 feet. And when I say 11 feet, I'm talking from this supporting beam to this supporting beam. About 11 feet span. This right here is right about 6 feet to the bottom of the log. So from the bottom of this beam right to the ground. This one up here, you're just under 8 feet from here down to the ground. I think you're actually at like 7 foot 8 inches, something like that, from there to there. Obviously it changes slightly because the ground isn't perfectly level. If we look at the distance between posts, I tried to stick to about 8 feet at the back. At the front, to be honest with you, I just followed wherever there was a tree. Same thing with at the back. So it just so happened that 8 feet was approximately where I could find those 3 trees, give or take, right? Now, if we talk about the overall slope of this roof here, judging by what I said, 6, give or take 8 feet, going across approximately 12, we're at about a 212 pitch. That's a fairly low slope. This is a steel roof or metal roof, as you can see up above you. This does not shed snow at all, so I actually have to use that thing on the ground there. That's a roof rake, and you probably have no idea what that is if you live in a country where you don't get snow, but here in Canada you pretty much have to have that unless you're going to get up there with a little hand shovel and do it yourself. Anyways, that takes the snow off the roof, because even though I have a fairly substantial number of rafters here and the diameter is pretty substantial, I never do trust a solid snow. What ends up happening around here is we can get a foot of snow overnight, and if I don't get out here because I'm away or I'm busy and we get several consecutive nights of foot snowfalls, well, we end up with 3 feet or 4 feet up there, compacts. We end up getting a warm, cold front, and it freezes and ultimately forms ice, and it just turns into a nightmare, and it's extra heavy. So I get up there and get that snow off as soon as I can, at least as soon as I remember. Hasn't collapsed on me yet though, and this has been, as I said, I think 3 solid winters, and it could last another winter, I'm sure. It's just not up to my practicality standards, we'll call it. It's not doing what I want it to, hence why we're building version 2.0. And one other thing I want to show you about this that I want to try to incorporate into version 2. So the next version of my sawmill shack is a collection system for water, a water collection system. You guys are going to notice I got some eaves troughs here and they're just sort of hanging on the ground. The reason they're there is I had to take them down when I cut down some trees. But what those eaves troughs did was basically they sat on these pieces of wood, and I've sort of taken some of them off to facilitate tree cutting. You can see them up there. I just had them, what do you call that, strapped up there with those zip ties. And they ultimately came down and they went to a piece of the big O drain pipe. And then it came down to these barrels. I have them on both ends of my sawmill. Why I did that is because if you have a look here, it sort of is like a half moon shape, right? So if water fell here, it's not gonna go all the way there, it would come this way. So I have barrels for drainage on both sides. I capture that water because out here I have no source of water aside from trekking through the bush to one of my springs. But I need that water in order to fill up my lubrication tank right there. I want that in version 2.0. And if you haven't seen me fill this up in the past, check out my other videos in the playlist. I use one of these. This ends up hooking up to your drill, and this just it's got a garden hose on one end and a, I don't know what this hose is on the other, and this is how I get the water from the blue jugs there, the blue tanks, into the reservoir. And getting near the end here, talking about version 1.0, this is how the sawmill is sitting. You'll notice here I've got some wood blocks. The wood goes all the way across to the other adjustable leg, and then it sits ultimately on a concrete block that's on the dirt. This is not ideal. This right here would be ideal if you didn't have freeze-thaw cycles, but here in Ontario, Canada, freeze-thaw cycles causes this to go out of level at least once a year in the spring. So I have to re-level this. That's not that big of a deal, but I think if I'm going to redo the sawmill shack, I'm going to rethink how I have this positioned. What I'm going to do with version 2.0, I'm going to get myself and this off the ground onto a platform. So I'm going to build essentially a deck. Everything's going to sit on it, and I'm going to have the sawmill then sitting on its own big long beams. Those beams, one for each side, so one beam for this side, one beam for that side, will allow me to re-level as necessary by just simply putting shims under two locations, probably at the far ends, right? That's going to hopefully simplify my life a little bit, because this setup is not ideal. When this goes out of level, I got to find out where I can adjust it, and if, let's say, that end has dropped a little bit, I got to come down and readjust every single bunk all the way down everywhere it has supports. The last thing I'm going to talk about for this particular setup I've got is, what was that? Hearing things out here. Last thing I'm going to talk about is this right here. You guys have a look under there. That's nothing too fancy. That is what I call the log bunks. This is where I load logs onto. And just forgive me for all the offcuts right now. I've thrown them out the front. Normally I throw them out the back, but I don't want to do any more cleanup out there. Log bunks. This is where I load logs with my tractor. I load them here, and these log bunks are at such a height, so it's just slightly higher than the top of the actual sawmill bed. That allows me to pull these things out. I don't even know what you call them. Let's call them outriggers for right now. It allows me to pull those out when I want to load a log, and I simply use my cant hook and I just roll it down nice and easy. I have this on both sides. I'm going to try to incorporate something similar on my next particular build, but what I'm going to do this time is, because I'm on a platform, I'm probably going to not have this gap here. Well, maybe I will have that gap. Actually, I haven't even figured that out yet. If you guys know what I should do for my platform setup, there's something more convenient than this, having that gap there, I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. Anyways, that's pretty much an overview of this particular setup. I have this makeshift workbench down here, and to be honest with you, I tend to just keep my coffee up there and whatever else off the ground. I don't do a heck of a lot with that. I'm sure I could. And down at the other end, what I have is a little bit of space where I store lumber to dry. You'll notice I'm running out of space here. That's why I have lumber out here. I think ultimately, and definitely not this year, I'm going to build a solar kiln. So there's a little bit of a teaser for you guys. I'm going to build a solar kiln. I don't know where. but I need some way to get the wood sort of out of here, away from the sawmill, and somewhere where it'll dry faster. All right, so let's talk about why I don't like this particular setup, or why I think it can be improved as we get bombarded with pine needles. What I don't like about this setup is sort of the placement of the sawmill. It should have been further back, and one of the reasons why I want it further back, and I mean further back into the woods, is because if you turn around here and look, those trees and that tree line is very close to where I have to load logs. When I get logs on the front of this tractor and I have to load it up there, I don't have much room here to maneuver, and I have to back right up to those trees. One day, I hope it's not today or tomorrow, when I'm loading logs, I'm gonna back into a tree over there, and whatever these windows cost, I know they're not free, I'm gonna curse myself for not having the sawmill, the new one, further back. So that's reason number one. Reason number two that I don't like this sawmill, although this is serving a purpose, I am a little bit afraid of this low slope. Anyone who lives in central Ontario and has a low slope on a roof, you probably worry whenever we have a winter storm warning, and believe me, that comes up very often around these parts. I want to get rid of that low slope. My next building is going to have a slope similar to my shop, which is a 612. So you're pretty much, you know, pretty much a good angle, so any snow accumulation will self-shed, and that's what I'm looking for. Reason number three, I don't like this location in this setup. When we have snow, which, as I talk about it all the time, it does eventually melt. When it eventually melts, it goes right down there to the lowest point. I've got this raked out, so I'm not walking all over debris, right? Well, this happens to be the lowest part, and as a result, everything washes in here. So when I get out here in the spring, well, guess what? I'm walking through a big mud pile. I end up having to throw down planks so I'm not in that mud, and I just don't like it. So I'm gonna build myself a platform and get off the ground. As I said before, I don't like to have my sawmill sitting on these individual concrete blocks, because that forces me to do a lot of little adjustments in order to get this thing back into level. Next version, I'm putting this on 2 large beams, so that all I'm having to do is secure this thing to the beam, and then when I have to re-level, I just shim under one side or the other, and ultimately that'll get me back in action faster in the spring. Now, another reason I don't like this setup is, if we have a look here, this log this way is under cover. These logs are out of the cover. I want all my logs, after I get them stacked up, to be out of cover. I want them to get rained on. Some of these get dirt on them, and the only opportunity for that dirt to get off it, aside from me brushing it off, is for it to get rained on. I want these logs out from underneath the overhang. They don't have to be there. They can be wet. In actuality, that might make it easier for sawing. Get them out into the elements so that they're not taking up valuable roof space or valuable floor space where I want my sawmill and myself to be covered, and not the logs themselves. Probably the biggest pet peeve I have, and the biggest reason I want to switch this out, is because I didn't build it for longevity. I actually missed a step, and I kick myself for not doing this. You sort of live and learn this. But I didn't take the bark off these logs before I put them up as rafters. What ended up happening then was we ended up getting a whole bunch of insects which lived underneath that bark, and they burrowed into the logs. Now, I've had a look, and all these logs are solid, but there are small little holes where the insects have burrowed their way in, and that doesn't sit well with me. And if you have a look here, you guys can see what I'm talking about there. See these little burrows and little stuff like that? Like, I don't know what this does long term. You know, I can speculate that it won't do anything, but if we have a look here, it could do something, right? Let's dig all that off. It could do something, and I just don't know what. And to be honest with you, my biggest piece of advice, if you're gonna build with red pine logs like this, get them under cover quickly, which I did, but get the bark off them. That's my biggest regret, my biggest fear in the back of my mind with this structure, that there's some unforeseen, I don't know, cracking going on because of all the little holes or insects burrowing, and it could have a catastrophic failure one day, and I don't want to put my name on that, that's for sure. Nope, now the wind's really howling. I don't know if you guys can see that little bit of a movement there. No, me neither. Anyways, one of the last things I'm going to tell you guys about that really drives me crazy, and is sort of an afterthought after I built this structure, was where I'm going to put my offcuts. As you can imagine, I cut lumber right here. I throw the offcuts out the back. Let's go over there and have a look where those offcuts land. They land even with my best throw, they land right about here. So they're sticking out this way. Well, that's fine and dandy, but I didn't exactly plan for how I'm going to get those offcuts out of here when I put this thing up. Up until recently, there was a tree right here, and there was a tree right there. What these trees prevented me from doing was getting in to where my offcuts were. I had no way to get in here with the tractor and pick them up from the side. The closest I could get the tractor, I could get the edge of the grapple to about here. Well, the offcuts are back there. So if I wanted to get them out here, I had to pull them from the end, reposition them, repile them, and then get a good grab on the side. That's not happening now. When I throw my offcuts on my new sawmill shack, they're gonna land out there, sort of where the wood chips are. Why that's great is that's a perfect runway for me to get my tractor in. I can drive straight in here, pick up the offcuts with my grapple, move them to a different location if I'm gonna reuse them, or even just get them out of here and go deal with them somewhere else, like chip them or burn them or whatever you're gonna do. So that was a big consideration here, dealing with the offcuts. Because if you guys have seen my videos, I curse those things all the time, and it's my own doing. So now I think we're gonna be in a much better position with the new the new sawmill shelter. Now I'm standing right about where my new sawmill will be positioned. It'll basically be where I'm standing, facing that way. What's great about this is from time to time, I will have logs that are longer than my sawmill bed. When I have those, I need to slide them in from the end. I can't get them around the posts on the actual sawmill shelter, so I have to slide them in from the end. There's a little bit of fancy cutting involved if you're gonna be cutting logs that are longer than your sawmill. But I do it from time to time, and the only way to do it is to bring it in this way, right to where I'm standing. So I can slide it in directly behind the sawmill. So if you can imagine on the old setup, it would come in directly this way, or it would come in down at the other end that way. As it stands now, I've got my sawmill, workbench in the way, or I've got this pile of lumber in the way. So that doesn't work for this current setup. But the new one, after I dig those stumps out, will have a perfect runway for the longer logs. Now, many of you folks have been around the block with me before, and you've seen my adventures and misadventures out here at the portable sawmill. And many of you folks say, hey, instead of you giving up on sawmilling in the middle of winter like you have been doing the last several years, why don't you get out here as best you can and cut some wood in the middle of winter? And I agree with you. I haven't cut all that much lumber in winter because it is such a challenge to get out here. And it's a challenge to get logs piled up in the winter because I can't get around easily with my tractor. That's an excuse up until now, though. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a change with version 2.0 of my portable sawmill shelter, and that's going to include extended log bunks. I'm going to have a solid length of log bunks so that I can stack up many different logs like the ones you see there, so that by time winter does roll around, even if I can't get the tractor out here, I will have enough logs backed up on that log bunk that I can cut all winter long. So guys, as you can tell, I got my work cut out for me. I got a whole bunch of ideas. I got a whole bunch of reasons I want to change my setup. But there comes one issue. I am nowhere near ready to go yet. So that's what I'm going to get up to right now. I'm going to start cutting some wood. I'm going to cut that stuff up. I'm going to add a few more beams, posts, and rafters so that next time you guys see me, I'll be putting a nail to the wood. I'll be putting this thing into action. I'll be getting down to work. Guys, thanks for watching. Come on back next time. If you haven't done so already, I would encourage you guys to subscribe if you like this content, and check out my playlist, Sawmill Setup. There's all kinds of videos of me dealing with this HM130 by Woodland Mills. Guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.